Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shamika Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-host Shamika Michelle, and Wilfred Riley is in a hotel somewhere clawing his way to the Wi-Fi. He'll be here shortly. And our guest this week is Adam Coleman. He is the founder of Wrong Speak Publishing and the author of an exciting book, Victor, what is it again? Victim to Black Victor.
Correct.
Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. I'll be looking forward to it.
Hard copy. I'm working with the PDF.
Okay, let me brag one more time then.
Black Victim to Black Victor. So let's start off by talking about that. Why you wrote the book and why the title.
Why I wrote the book. So there are two reasons. A few years back, maybe like 3 or 4 years back, I started traveling a lot. Pre-COVID, obviously. And, I was just bouncing around Europe by myself, doing solo traveling. And I really started thinking about my life, all the ups and downs I had. My son was becoming a teenager. And I started thinking about what I want to do with the rest of my life. And I started thinking about personal legacy. Obviously your children are your legacy, but I wanted to leave something for him. And I thought about writing a book, but I had no idea what to write about. I was fascinated with questioning things, but I couldn't put together anything, to be honest with you, until George Floyd. George Floyd turned into what it turned into, and I never saw it coming. We've seen different situations like Trayvon Martin. It's a big story, but I think the combination of COVID lockdowns and everything else, it just exploded into what it basically came out to be, just a very emotional and to the point of being irrational response to the world, especially about Black Americans and what it's like to be Black in America, from other Black people and non-Black people. And I felt like the conversation lacked nuance. It was overly emotional. It lacked any sort of logic or just questioning certain things or just asking any type of questions about the situation. I'm pretty, at the time, I would say, I was a pretty private person. I kept to myself. I didn't really let anybody know how I felt. I didn't really express myself on like social media, Facebook. I didn't really use Twitter. But then I started going to the free speech forums and just kind of figuring out, like, am I the only one that feels this way? And talking to other people. And so, I wanted to make sure I didn't feel crazy. Like, is everybody else losing their mind and I'm just watching it happen? And, I started writing and I got encouragement. They said, you should write more often. And it just hit me. I was like, why don't I write about this? And then it basically started from there. So it took me about 9 months, from start to finish. And I just decided to publish it myself just to get it out there. And, a relatively unknown person and just seeing if anybody was interested in hearing what I had to say. So, from going from obscurity to, being on your podcast, you guys actually want to talk to me. It's a blessing.
And why the title?
The title, I wanted something that ended with a positive. Which is why like the last 9 chapters are solutions. Mm-hmm. It hit me like in the middle of writing. It's like, I don't want to just complain. Like, I don't want to just complain about what Black people are doing wrong or what's happening to Black people or anything like that. I want to have realistic solutions. I feel like most of the solutions that are thrown out there are like fantasy solutions, like end racism, or end hatred. Okay, good luck with that.
I think they just want to erase it, Adam.
They just erase it.
They want to erase racism.
Gotcha. But I wanted to have something that's real, and use stories and just Basically, someone put it, me writing, they said the book is basically one really good self-help book. And I didn't really think of it that way before, but it kind of is. So yeah, Black victim, references the victim mentality to becoming a Black victor. So it's talking about me personally, at times where I felt like a victim and overcoming that mindset to becoming a victor. And it's also talking about the mainstream viewpoint of Black people as being these inherent victims and saying you can become a victor too. So it has a couple different meanings.
All right, so let's get into that. I want to say that, like you, I wrote a book after George Floyd's killing, and unlike you, I saw this coming. I was talking about it for 2 years, and people were calling me like I'm crazy. I was just recently talking to someone about this, that I was sitting in on a show in 2020. So the guy who was on Drive Time in Chicago used to work for Trump. Mm-hmm. Trump called him back to work on the campaign. So there was a guy who was hosting one show who went to Drive Time, and they asked me to fill in. So I filled in for 13 months during an election year, following a guy on his show called The Liberty Hour that was all about Constitution and politics. And they said, well, do the show the way you do you. And I didn't talk about politics. They were like, why do you keep talking about this race stuff? And I remember saying, I don't often pat myself on the back, but I do for this. Because I said, look, the left is pushing race like crazy. We're saying, just treat everybody equally. Everything will be fine. You are correct. But the culture's not moving that way. So if you're quiet about it and they get to control the narrative, where do you think we're going to end up? Now, granted, because of George Floyd, I didn't think it would accelerate that fast. I was thinking 3 years down the line. But I knew it was going to be a point where everybody's going to be talking about race, where it's in the schools and it's all over the place. And then conservatives will be left like, now I want to fight against it. Oh, but to fight against it, you have to talk about it. But you didn't want to talk about it, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that it's good that we have different voices because you hear different things. Everybody doesn't think like you. There's things, I read the book and we agree on a lot of things, but I was like, oh, I didn't think about putting it that way. And I often talk to conservatives, radio hosts, TV, people who write a lot will say, we say the same things, but I never thought about it the way you put it. Shamika, the same. So we don't all, even if we think the same about an issue, we all don't use the same examples. We all don't have the same experience. My truth is always a little bit different. So I think, I think I'm glad you wrote the book, and I think it's important that you told because I couldn't write your book. I could, we're both Black. We both have similar views on the problems and the solutions, but I could never write that book. I mean, we'll talk about my background and other backgrounds, but there's a difference there, and it's important. And I want to go to Shamika and start with that. At the beginning of his book, one of the things he did, which was, again, unique, is he opened with simple questions. Like, I got a list of questions that I think we as a community and we as a country need to answer. What did you think about that, the way he started the book?
I just looked at the entire book and thought to myself, my God, how did he write so much so fast?
It is a lot.
That's what I wanted to know because I'm struggling. And you too, Charles. You just wrote so much and so fast. How? Because I have so much to say, but it's just like putting it down sometimes.
Let's be real. Shamika's talking because she's working on a book, but that's because you're working on 3 books. If you decide which book you want to do, maybe you write more.
Well, it's just so overwhelming.
I hear you.
Yeah, you just do your voice and write your voice and put it out there. I mean, I can't wait to read it, but I know people will be clamoring to hear what you have to say in long form. I mean, your whole life can't be these 2-minute clips that get 150,000 views. You got to have something else to say besides.
And it's just so overwhelming. So I just.
And then you get on here and you don't want to talk. How about that?
You said what?
I said, then you get on here and you don't want to talk.
I know it depends on what the subject is. So I'm ready to get into some of this. But I first want to ask Adam, how long did it take you to write the book? Because you said you thought about this after George Floyd and you just wanted to put it down. So how'd you get through it so fast?
I was actually pretty disciplined. During the lockdowns, let me start over. I'm pretty fortunate because my day job, and I'm an IT manager. I'm kind of like a one-man show at the company I work for, but for the most part, I sit behind the desk. So I did like 95% of the writing while at work.
Ignore him.
I'll just ignore him. It's okay. Yeah, I did most of the writing while I was at work. I dedicated, I want to say, an hour to an hour and a half of writing. I actually write pretty quick. So in an hour and a half, I can write basically like a page to 2 pages. And I just did it every day. Oh, now we got double well.
I'll let him figure it out. You ignore him. Be a pro. The show must go on.
I did it. I basically did an hour to an hour and a half every day. I was dedicated to completing it. Mm-hmm. My job wasn't as busy because of COVID. Things were kind of a little bit slow. So it gave me more time to focus on it, no interruptions, that kind of thing. There were times where I would hear something, I would hear a clip or something crazy would happen. That's the whole thing. Like last year, there were so many examples that would just pop up one day and it would just spark an idea and I would just start writing. So, I use some real world examples throughout the book to illustrate what the problem is or what I'm talking about. Let
me ask you a question about that, because that's one of the hardest things that people underestimate when you're writing something that's topical, nonfiction that's topical. Because, this book that I have coming out on Tuesday, Race Crazy, BLM 1619, and the Progressive Racism Movement, is my 3rd book, humble brag. And so what the hardest part has been for me is when you're writing about current events, how to cut it off. Because there's stuff that still keeps coming. So you're like, I have this great example, but then something happens in the news and it's a better example. So I want to go back and reference that. Or you're telling a story and then something else keep happening. Or you get an answer to that. At some point you got to say, okay, I'm going to stop watching the news and draw this line. So during COVID, it was so much crazy. How did that affect your writing?
No, I felt like it helped me. I felt like it helped me because I would have, to be honest with you, there were certain situations that were perfect examples. Forgive me, I don't remember their names, but there was a situation outside of the subway in Michigan where a white woman was filmed pulling out her gun and holding it down, telling the woman to back off. And the woman who was being aggressive was a black woman. Mm-hmm. And I remember when that first hit, they were making it sound like this random white woman pulled a gun out of a black woman. Racism is still alive. But then when you waited 24 hours, more video came out and the woman is pregnant, trying to retreat, walk away from the woman. The woman is antagonizing. The husband's coming over saying, leave her alone. We need to get in the car. The woman's saying, I don't know what you're talking about. She's being surrounded by 2 aggressive women, right? Then when she's backing up, the car stops and everybody's like, see, she was trying to back into them. But the reality is her car is incapable of backing into people because it has an automatic stop. The woman hit the back of the car disabled. That's why the car stopped. The woman got scared and she got out, pulled out her gun and said, back off. Right. So this is so much nuance to that situation. Yet all everybody saw was white woman pulls out gun on black woman. The black woman is clearly aggressive. The white woman has every right to defend herself, to defend her unborn child, and defend her husband. And so that, to me, was the perfect example of the lack of accountability that is given to unruly black people simply because of their skin tone. When in any other situation, this person should be reprimanded. But what happened was both that woman and her husband lost their jobs. They're the ones who got put up on charges, right? The woman had hit her car, yet nothing happened to her. And to me, that is the politicization of being black in America. That is the special advantage, especially during COVID, especially post George Floyd, that everybody just says, benefit of the doubt, give it to the black person.
So are you saying, because that sounded just like what I hear blacks say about whites, saying that this happened to some black guy. And in any other situation, if it was anybody else, let that be anybody else. So are you saying that's black privilege?
I'm saying that there are advantages to being black in certain situations. Just like there are advantages of being white in certain situations. There are advantages in life. There are advantages of being a woman in certain situations and a man in certain situations. That's life. But to pretend that Black people have zero advantage at any point in time in this country is an outright lie.
Yeah. Shamika, back to you. As Will makes faces, even though it says his recording fails.
I definitely agree with being a woman having its advantages. I was just at Sam's and I had gotten 3 cases of water and I was struggling. And so I got out to the door and I saw, a couple men standing over to the side. So now here it is. I have pushed the cart from where I got the water up to pay for it, out for them to check my receipt. But as soon as I saw the men, I'm like struggling, like I can't hardly push it. And then one stops and goes, "Would you like for me to put that in your car?" And I'm like, "Would you? Thank you so much." So
That's
I
definitely a
use my
privilege.
advantage as much as I can.
Yeah, I don't blame you. And that's human nature. You use what you have. You use your advantages. Yeah.
Now, did you, so I saw you just got married as well.
Yes.
So I want to know, like, when you met your wife, and I don't, just forgive me, because I'm like trying to put this together with the book, because I'm like, he's talking real good as a man, and I know he just got married, so I'm putting it all together.
Yeah.
How long have you been with this woman? And let's go from there.
Just over 2 years.
Okay. And so you all just got married this year. But what I found was interesting was the way you talk about your son, and how you wanted to do better for him because of your dad, and how your dad never just got it together. Can you talk a little bit more about your son and how that came to be?
Yeah, so I had my son at the age of 21. Like you stated, my father wasn't in my life. One of the big things I talk about in the book is just being almost like a deficient man. I didn't have anybody really to show me what a proper masculine man looks like. We moved a lot. It was basically myself and my sister. So it was a struggle for me to figure that out. And here I am, a relatively young father, having to figure out how do I raise my son, just first off. So, there were some things that, obviously, just like any other parent, you learn along the way. You get better with time. But I remember after my son was born, one of the first things I told myself is, I'm not going to be like my father. And so I made it an effort to be in his life. Obviously, his mother and I are not together, but I have him every weekend. We have a good relationship. We co-parent. He's 16 years old now. And one of the proudest things was, because like I told you, I wrote the book in part for him, and he read the book. And so I hope I'm not talking out of turn, but he told me that the chapter where I talk about my father made him cry. Because, I told him my situation, so he's not like he didn't know. But I go into heavy detail about what it was like and how it felt for me. And so he felt it, just like other people have felt that chapter. Other people, regardless of race, have felt that chapter. So it was a really proud moment. And, he's proud to tell other people, like, my father is an author. And I gave him a couple copies of books because his teachers were interested. So, it's a really proud moment for me to have my son see what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be honest, because I feel like there's a lot of honesty that's being left on the table by a lot of people for whatever reason, uncomfortably honest. And if I have to use my life as an example, then I'll use my life as an example. So.
This quote I liked, something that you said: a well-adjusted man stands up for what he believes, provides for the people he loves, and tends to his responsibilities regardless of his situation. I thought that was a very powerful statement, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've had times, as a child, we were homeless a couple times. And as an adult, there was a brief period of time where I was homeless. I want to say maybe like for a few weeks. I've had my car repossessed. I've had to move back home with my mom. I've gotten fired from a job and had to start all over, got unemployment. But I got fired from a couple jobs and had to start all over. But all of those things I would not take back, because I feel like all that adversity helped me to become the person I am today, made me more appreciative of where I'm at now, and who I'm with. My wife is a wonderful woman, and I'm always thankful that she's in my life. And I don't know if I didn't go through those experiences, would I be here, sitting here talking with you?
Right.
And my wife is a big support for me. She encouraged me to continue to write. I don't know if I would have been able to complete the book without her encouragement. So, all of these things make us who we are.
Now, you talked about your father being absent, growing up in a single family home. So you just mentioned the chapter on your dad where you went into detail about how it affected you not having your dad around.
Yeah.
But Shamika's talking about you being open and honest, keeping it naked, as Shamika would say. You wrote about your mom.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are probably like, wow, and pretty honest and specific details about expectations, about spankings, about dating, about why she never married, all those kind of things. So talk about what that was like for you writing it, what her response was. Has she read the book? And if she has, what she thought of it, and just the other side of your father, what that was like, talking about your childhood and your mother and your sister.
Talking about my father was easy because, he's not with us anymore. So he passed away. But even if he was alive, I would still write the same thing. Talking about my mother was difficult, and I wanted to be honest, but I wanted to be careful about what I say. I didn't want to talk too much about her upbringing, even though it's significant to how she is today, from a psychological standpoint. But to be honest with you, I didn't tell her. She found out after the fact.
Oh, I thought you were like, she still doesn't know. When she watches this podcast, she'll find out. You mean you didn't tell her while you were writing? Okay.
Yeah. While I was writing, to be honest with you, not too many people knew I was even writing the book. I wanted it to be something that I wanted to do for myself. I did tell my sister that, I wrote a little part about her, but I didn't go into depth talking about her. But I wanted to talk about my mom because I wanted to use our situation as an example. And it is my life story that I'm talking about. It does a disservice if I'm not able to discuss how my mom was a great woman who did the best that she could and struggled to raise us. But I have questions as to why we were put in that situation in the first place. And if I'm to hold myself accountable, my father accountable, why would I skip my mother? And, I think we've lost the premise as far as accountability equals love. I put in there, I remember one line, I basically stated, this is not to pick on my mother. I love my mother, but we have to be honest as to the predicament. My father was a married man the whole time. Why did she put us in that situation? He was never going to leave his wife, never did. And that is why we struggled for her to raise 2 children by herself and had to bounce around from place to place, state to state. Why were we put in that situation where my father was never really going to be in my life and he was never really interested? All of that could have been prevented. And granted, if she made different choices, I wouldn't be here. But I'm principled enough to say then, if that's the case, then that so be it. I think more people need to be more conscious about the decisions that they make when it comes to who they mate with, and not just go based upon, we'll see what happens, or this is how I feel right now. Because not a lot of children of single parent homes are willing to speak up and say how they felt, question their moms. You guys have seen it. You're not allowed to question your mom, right? Your mom is perfect no matter how obviously flawed she is. You're not allowed to question it. And so if I'm going to be honest, I can't skip over my mother. So to answer your other question, she was upset. She was more hurt than upset, but she actually was hurt by the question where I asked, about me being a burden for my mother in the first part. She was actually hurt by that. I don't even think she read the book, to be honest with you. She was actually hurt that I thought I was a burden to her. But I had to explain to her, that's how I felt with that particular mindset. When I'm struggling and I'm having to depend on you, I'm feeling like I'm a burden to you. Like I'm not living up to the expectations that I'm supposed to be. So she kind of understood, but she was hurt by that. But I think she understands, and I tried to explain to her that, this book is helping people, and you coming off as a good person with good intentions who's flawed is a very human thing. Just like I'm doing that for myself. I'm not making myself perfect in the book. I make mistakes. I think it's important to show people that way instead of, making this fantasy world about our mothers. Our parents are people. They all make mistakes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that, because I wrote about my mom in a book, not in, as in detail as you, and she read it. And it was funny but you talk about the perfection and the way we describe our moms. And I used to always say that, I had a great relationship with my parents and a good mom, but my mom's just a little crazy, a little weird, right? I said, my mom's crazy. And people would just be like, I can't believe you say that. I'm like, so you've heard of murderers, right? Yeah. You know that there's rapists out there, yeah? And people steal and do all these other evil things, yeah? Those people have family members, right? You can't be like, well, just because that's your mother, like that, she's no longer a person. And I'm like, and it's not like I'm saying bad. I'm not saying she beat me or abandoned me. I'm just saying she's a little crazy. So I wrote about something that she said. And so she read the book. And I said, so what'd you think about that? She was like, I read what you wrote about me. And they gonna think I'm racist. I'm like, well, so that was her issue when I wrote about what she said about white people. I said, when you said it, she's like, yeah, but you can't just put that in the book. I'm like, why are you saying? I think you say it to their faces. So it is interesting that you say people expect that, you just treat your parents, particularly your mom, as if they have no flaws. But you were going to say something, Shamika, because then I want to move to probably the hottest part of the book. But go ahead, Shamika.
No, I was just going to say that I found that it's very easy for people to talk about their fathers and say, like, if the father wasn't there, it's acceptable in society to say, oh, he was a deadbeat dad, or my daddy won't shit, or blah, blah, blah. It's very acceptable, but it is taboo to say anything against your mother. And I always say that even Tupac said, even though you were a crack fiend, mama, you always was a black queen. And I'm thinking, was she really as a crack fiend?
Yeah.
But that's like society says you can't, they make you feel like you can't say anything wrong about your mom. And just, reading about your mom having a child by a married man, my first child is by a married man. And so I had to get to the point where, and by the way, he did leave, and gosh knows I didn't want him to. He showed up at my job with his stuff in the car, and I was like, what are you doing? I don't want you like that. But, I had to just be honest, and, I can't drag this man and say, oh, he wasn't there, he was terrible, and he didn't do this and he didn't do that. What did I expect? getting involved and having a baby with a married man. Like, I have to take some accountability for that. And so it didn't hurt my feelings when my daughter said, Mama, you really should have chose better. You're absolutely right. I should have. At 19, I didn't know any better. So what I try to do with my children is to be very honest with them and say, look, I messed up. Now, this is what I need you to do so that you don't mess up. And a lot of times it seems as though women, it's really hard for women to say, I chose wrong. We like to point the finger and blame the man. Well, he's not doing this or he didn't do that. It's his fault, his fault, his fault. Well, this is the man that you chose. This is the man that you spread your legs to and let him, fuck raw. Sorry, listeners. When I try to sugarcoat, I can't get it out. So you let him fuck raw. You had his baby, but he's the bad person. He's the only person here that's irresponsible. I just can't let that one slide.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's the accountability aspect. And the good thing is this, you recognize that part, like, I should have done better, right? The problem that I see is not that people make mistakes. People make mistakes. The problem that I see is that within the culture, we're not allowed to say that was a mistake. We're not allowed to say, hey, maybe that's not the best idea to do this. Mm-hmm. So you tell your children, don't be like me, make better decisions. It's, I'm strong, independent woman, I'm single. It's all these cover phrases. It's a constant pick me up, even though she made bad decisions after bad decisions. And part of the culture is not to correct. It's to excuse and point blame at somebody else. So like you said, we have no problem saying deadbeat dad, but we never say deadbeat mother. We never say passive mothers. We never say abusive mothers, emotionally abusive mothers, nothing like that. They're always perfect no matter what, especially if they're single because they're doing it all by themselves. But there are so many different situations where I see that women put themselves in that predicament in so many different ways that could have been prevented in so many different ways. So, like I said, people make mistakes, but I have trouble when the culture says it's not a mistake. Everything is fine. She's a great person. She never did anything wrong. And then we repeat the cycle over and over and over.
Well, that brings me to the next thing. What I was really interested in, and I think will be a part of the book that everybody kind of goes, "Whoa, you're warm. Those fingers were warm at this point." I'm assuming he was typing.
Yeah.
You pretty much put feminism on trial, and I know Shamika will love this part. And you really, as you just said, not really attacking people for making mistakes, but talk about the culture and how we just forgive people for, especially women. I mean, the sisters, they're doing it for themselves. I can bring home the bacon and fry it up in the pan, all the things. Anything you can do, I can do better. All this over time manifests itself into bad behaviors and decisions. And people just saying, okay, that's just what women do. We should celebrate it. So talk about your feminism chapter. I'm just going to let you two talk
now. I feel like feminism has been, from a political standpoint, has been using Black women for generations. It has been something where they said, this way of thinking is to empower you. And all I see is it puts them in positions of experiencing more trauma, of accelerating their likeliness to die earlier, to die alone. I don't know about you guys, but it seems like an epidemic of Black women who are ultimately going to die alone. They're unmarried. I think it's like a quarter of Black women are married, compared to I think it's about 3/4 for white women are married. So it's a very different outcome for Black women. We already know statistics as far as economics for them. When they're raising children, they're ultimately, majority of them are poor because of it, because it's one income earner and they're having to raise even just one child by themselves. Feminism has set up women to feel that they're always empowered Meanwhile, they're always struggling. And they're economically struggling, they're emotionally struggling, they're struggling because of trauma, they're struggling because of obesity. I talk about the taboo part. Black women are the most overweight population. The overweight demographic within the country.
You're still in my thunder. Stop right there. Stop right there. I told you I had a quote. Since you went there,
Yep.
Let me bring it up. Women are infallible in their minds, so they can't just be perfect mentally. They have to be perfect physically. We call black women thick, curvy, and big bone as they live their life suffering and dying from preventable health conditions. Here's the line. Feminists tell black women, don't change who you are, but have no eulogy prepared when our black women lay dead in an extra large casket.
Ooh.
Yeah. That's exactly it.
Ouch.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like Shamika. Did you plagiarize that from Shamika? Shamika's right now saying, "Turn it." Why didn't I think of it?
Right, exactly. Why didn't I word it? Yes, I needed that.
We had to sit on that for a minute. But no, you talk about all these problems. But what's worse, I think, is what you point out, saying that there's a false dichotomy and there's this inverted yin yang, whereas all the things I said before about how strong and powerful women are, and then they put down men. Men ain't this, and you ain't no good. These deadbeat men. Patriarchy is bad. But if you want to be a strong woman, you need to be more like a man. You need to take that job. You need to be masculine. You need to be more feminine, man. You need to be more masculine. Why would you want to be? Men are terrible, but you should be more like a man. Right. All this other kind of thing. So they don't, as I always say, they don't even believe what they're saying. Right. Because if it was so bad to be a male, they wouldn't try to take on traditional male roles. And if it was so great to just be feminine and be yourself, you wouldn't keep trying to take on all these other roles and do these other things. So talk about that part of your book. I think that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, like you said, it's like an inverted role. The women have become more masculine, the men have become more feminine. And this is why I say the number one issue is single parent homes. And just to kind of go on a little bit, I think one of the biggest problems that conservatives have when it comes to this particular topic is that they say the number one issue is single parent homes for black people. And they just stop there. They don't say why, because it's supposed to be self-evident, but it's not always self-evident. People need to understand why exactly is this not a good thing, which is why I was breaking down the psychology of it as to what natural roles are for men and women. And by having, for example, I'll use myself, growing up with a mother and a sister and not having any exposure to men, I had feminine traits. It took years of working through those things to where I am today, where those particular traits are extremely minimal for myself to not being there. But it took me being very aware of those particular things. And I'm looking back at my past and like failed relationships, in certain situations where I'm like, why did I handle it that way? Why was I feeling that? Why was I so emotional? And a lot of the people that we think are tough guys are some of the most emotional, feminine acting men that you'll ever meet in your life. Their reaction, they lack being stoic in certain situations. They're overly emotional, right? And then the women are overly aggressive. They're you see more fight videos on World Star of women fighting than black women fighting than black men, because the roles have switched. The women have been told to take on a strong role, and they're getting reinforcement from their mothers to be strong all the time. You cannot depend on a man. Do for yourself. The boys are growing up around their mothers, and the mothers are shaping these boys to become men that they think that they would want, who always cater to them, who are always there, which is why I talk about the son husband syndrome. The men always feeling like they always have to do something. You could look at like NBA stars, for example. Who's the first person they thank? They always thank their mom. They go up and kiss their moms. They buy their moms a house. They buy their moms a car. Some of their mothers exploit them, and they still put up with it, right? Because they've been trained since they were a child to cater to their mother. But what about their fathers? Some of them do have fathers, but they didn't grow up around them. And it's that kind of switch of masculine women and feminine men that single parent households create. And all it does is keep perpetuating the cycle. The men are weak, and naturally, women don't want weak men, right? So in some ways, you can't blame black women for not wanting to stay with some of these bitch ass niggas. This is part of my French, but that's what it is.
Shamika, you wouldn't have anything to add about feminism, would you?
No, probably not. But listen, so,
give me 20 minutes. I got.
Well, I wanted to say when he was saying how, men have kind of become weak, or how you see children and they kind of esteem their mom all the time. I was talking to a man a while back, and he was keeping his son for the weekend while the mother, went off and just had a little girls' weekend or whatever. And he was like, this is so hard. I don't see how you all can do this all the time by yourself. And, because most of the time she's doing it by herself. No, she's not. Y'all live in the same house together, and you are a good father. So if I was like, I'm not going to let this slide. If you're in the house with her, she is not doing it by herself. And I want you to understand that women and men are different. Some of the things she's capable of doing is because she's a woman. That would be like the male line sitting around talking about, I don't know how you go out and get the food. That's how she was created. The lioness was created to go out and get the food and bring it back and let him get the big portion. That's just what it is. So I think men sometimes don't realize their own importance, because women, we have just over time beat them down so much that they are now buying into the foolishness. What do you mean she's doing this by herself? You are in the home. You are there. You are present. You are paying bills. You are spending time with this child. Don't let her make you think that she is doing something great and grand and that she's doing it by herself. Now, if she wants to do it by herself, let her pack her bags and chuck the deuces. But other than that, she needs to give you respect for what you're doing in this home, and you need to know that you deserve it because you have earned it, and you will not accept anything less.
Well, you made me think of something Adam said earlier that's important. He talked about growing up with just his mother and sister, and how that affected him, and how he had to consciously focus on his masculinity going forward because he'd been around feminine traits. And it seems so obvious. I guess we're not all psychologists. We can't figure this all out, but sometimes it's just common sense. And I've always said that. I'm like, one of the big problems we have in society today, and it's worse than the black community, but it's not a black problem. It's the men have been marginalized. The men are moved away. So for blacks, it's always traditionally argued that there's no black men at home. It's a single family household, even though it's much higher for whites than it used to be. But even when they're there, it's kind of like I wrote in my last book about the culture change. Remember, I kept saying it's culture. They're talking about politics. I'm like, you wanted one of the best examples of what happened to the culture? Let's talk about something innocuous. Television shows, television sitcoms. In the 50s and 60s, right, Dad was home. He was professional, but he still had time to pick up old Chip and rough him up in the front yard and brush his hair, like, get on out of here. They all ate dinner together. It was a nice family thing. Whether it was somebody who was a professional, an architect like Brady, or it was somebody else who was a blue collar, still did the same thing. Then we fast forward, and we got to where Dad was aloof. After the Cosby Show, right after that, there were dads on TV. They were in the house, but they were aloof, right? There were no more James Evanses. They were all like, hands off. They worked. Mom did with the kids. He'd come on and wave, and then he'd go away. And then they all made fun of him. It was like, oh, Billy, you're so dumb. Daddy was silly. And then after that, Dad wasn't home, right? So it happened in the TV shows. It happened in real life, and nobody noticed that. And I'm saying, so what happens now? We got professionals, right? You got these single moms, but they're professionals. I can do it because I make enough money. Or you have households where the dad's never really around. He's not involved in the kid's life. Nobody's going to church anymore. Not trying to promote religion on anybody, but the pastors were men. So you used to see men, so nobody goes there. They go to what little sporting events they go to in the suburbs, and we all know because we call them soccer moms. So the moms drive them around to everything they go, and that's how the moms bond. So they do that together. The extracurricular activities. All the teachers are women. All the daycare people are women. So when exactly are they seeing men? most of the time the father's not there. When the father's at home, the father's working, the mom's a housewife. He comes home, says hi to the kids and says, I got to go back to work, so he's not around. So what do you think is going to happen? No one has seen a stable man, right? Mm-hmm. And this is like, has happened for like almost two full generations. So no one saw this and just decided just to write a book and speak out and say, this might be a problem long term?
Right.
I mean, how did that get missed?
I don't know. To be honest with you, I think that what I wanted to say actually before was that feminism affects men just as much as women. Mm-hmm. The men have bought into it. They said, all right, maybe we've overstepped, and they basically just relinquished all power and all say, even just reasonable amounts of power. And they don't want to hold any sort of authority when they're naturally an authority figure. On the average, it's a more natural stance to take. If I look at my relationship with my wife, we've both personally transitioned as far as taking on gender roles, and we did that together. Where I want to take on the leadership of this house, and she's told me verbally, "You're the leader of this house." And I'm there to assure her on certain things. And she has her role where she takes care of certain things. And we try not to overstep each other. And when we do, we check each other. And that's basically it. So I think that, and also just to go a little bit, we talk about power. Feminism is just Marxism with a skirt. They always just talk about power. Everything's is a power dynamic. And Black women have been sold this illustrious power that they can always have in every single situation. But the power that men want is not they make it sound like benevolent leaders. We just want equal footing. We'll settle for equal footing as far as within our homes. We respect each other. We see each other as important in our own way, and we work together. That's essentially what most men want. But what happens with feminism is that they're always weary of any sort of power dynamic within the home. And they always assume that he's attempting to take from her. And that's not what leadership is. That's not what a good authority figure is. And there's no more good faith when it comes to men from the feminism end. They always see us as any moment he'll try to overstep and take her power. Mm-hmm. And it's this constant paranoia. So that's why they train women to say, go and get your degree, go and do this, get your own money, right? Making that man optional. Because they say, why do I need him for? I can do this all by myself. Mm-hmm. And they completely disregard all the benefits of having a man in their life.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you two final questions. Go ahead, Shamika.
Oh, no, I was going to say, and then women started saying, I can do bad all by myself. So yeah. It's like it made it seem as if being with a man is bad. And listen, I can do bad by myself, so yeah.
Or better than that, if they say they can do bad all by themselves, they're implying that it's bad, but the only reason you're here is because you're supposed to be the magic man that's going to make it good. So your presence is supposed to be just instant perfection. And if it's not, then I don't need you. Right. So come in here and fix it is what they're almost saying, right? If you can't fix everything, then get out, right? Yeah, it's something you can't solve. It's like circular. It's it's like them having this power and then saying they're oppressed. It's back to earlier I asked Adam if are you saying blacks have privilege? Obviously sarcastically. So now I guess you're saying women have privilege, right? Mm-hmm. So it's back to the same thing. We use it when it's like I say, I think I said before in the podcast in a certain situation where women are like, you need to treat us the same. We want to be equals. Don't be treating me any different. And then the moment it's equal, then it's like, well, wait a minute. What happened to my advantage? That's not fair. I'm a woman. You're supposed to be doing this for me, right? They want both. They want the preferential treatment, and they want all the equals that come with whatever they don't get by having preferential treatment. Mm-hmm.
Can I add one thing?
You can add 4 things if you like. You're the boss.
One thing that also comes with feminism is it's fed Black women this idea that they're better than they actually are. It's an inflated ego. One of the best examples, and to me, watching this.
No, go ahead. I'm listening.
Yeah. Have you ever watched Kevin Samuels?
Yes, I've seen a couple videos.
Okay. To me, I watch it as like a social experiment, right? And I'm really big into psychology. You can read it throughout the book. I'm referencing certain psychological points. And within psychology, when you focus on it, you see the same patterns over and over and over. And those patterns help to kind of give you an idea that there's a bigger problem that's here when we're seeing, it's like a hospital. Same type of patients, same type of problem, same type of diagnosis. I think there's something bigger that's going on right now. It's the same type of thing when I watch Kevin Samuels when it comes to Black women. It is a very similar type of woman between a certain age range, a certain size, a certain educational level, and a certain outcome that they all have. They're all generally, I want to say in their early 30s to 40s, generally single. Most of them have had long-term relationships, whether it be they were engaged, some of them being engaged 2-3 times and never got married. And now they've reached a point where they don't know what to do moving forward, but they all think that they're way above than they actually are. Even from a look standpoint, they, jokingly, every woman thinks every woman is cute in some way. They just refuse.
Except for Shamika.
Shamika's the only honest one. But I'll sit with my wife and she'd be like, "Oh, she's cute." I'm like, "No, she's not. Why are you like stretching the word cute? She is not cute."
Funny. I have seen a couple of his videos where he'll ask them, "Well, how would you rate yourself?" They're like, "I'm an 8.5."
Yeah. All right. And he'll do it. And he'll actually do it where he says, Beyonce, I think for him, he says Beyonce is an 8. Mm-hmm. So are you saying that you're an 8?
I think I am.
Well, yeah.
I'm a 7. I'm a 7.6.
Right. Right. And it is this overinflated ego. When he tells them, "Ma'am, you weigh more than a man."
You can't say that, Kevin.
Well, he does. And you know what? It's
like you can't say extra large casket.
Yeah, but it's true. It's the absolute truth. And what's happened is, one of the things I think is good about his show is that the shock value has kind of ended. And then women actually started coming back and watching, and they're saying he's the first honest person to put it in this way, even though it sounds harsh, but it sounds harsh because everybody has been lying to you. And he's trying to bring you back down, because for those women that are calling in, they think they are better than the average Black man. And
which makes it hard. How do you end up in a relationship if you're going into the relationship thinking you're better than him?
Right. And what he'll set them up too. And it happens just about every time. He says, you deserve, you're average woman. And so would you date an average Black man? Yeah, I would date an average Black man. All right. Well, the average Black man makes $40,000 a year. Well, he's like, see what I'm talking about. You think that you deserve a guy who makes 100,000.
I want to date an average white man with black skin.
Right. So basically what I'm saying is that he brings them back down to earth, because so many of them have been pumped up their entire life, busted looking women, so to speak, just think that they're way above. And I'll put this on men. Part of the reason they think that is because men sleep with them. Mm-hmm. And they confuse sexual attraction, getting sex from men and getting attention from men as being, I can get him for a relationship, and those are two separate things.
Yeah, he might just be bored. Men are weird.
Right.
And I think they confuse the type of man, because I know women that get men, but it's a man that I would never want.
Yeah. He's not an average Black man.
They're below average. They're like, but they think that just because they can pull those type of men, that they can also pull something above average. And I'm thinking, no, you have pretty much hit your peak.
Yeah. And you know what? Even if she's able to pull an above average guy for sex, that doesn't mean anything.
Not even for sex sometimes. I mean, some of these women just have to be honest with themselves. Like, you are like way down there, you know? And so I think an above average man won't even look their way, not even for sex. When you can pull somebody else for sex, you know what I mean? Why go
Well,
and
Yeah.
it
get a
might be
woman?
Tuesday and he might be bored. Guys are
No,
weird.
I haven't seen them. You know, I'm not saying they don't exist, but you know, there are some women that are like, I go to the dollar store in my pajamas and my bonnet, and then I come back and get in my bed. That's just nasty. And some men are just not into that. So they
Yeah.
pull a certain type of man, but they think in their head because their bed stays full with this certain type of man that, oh, if I wanted a man that's above average, I could get that. No, you can't. You
Yeah.
can't. And somebody
Well,
has to say to them, sweetheart, sit down. You know, like you ain't got it.
Yeah.
I got to move on to another question because time goes by pretty quickly when you're having fun. But I
Yeah.
do want to let Shamika. I mean, we got the door open. Is there anything you want to say about fat people before I move on? I mean, we said extra large casket, and you weigh more than a man, and you just sat idly by like it was no big deal. Just,
You know, because when I can get away with being quiet, you know.
Okay. Just want to make sure I didn't step on your moment, is all.
Yeah, no.
Okay, cool.
You know.
So Adam, there's so much more in the book. I mean, people have to read it. We can cover, but you go on. We got to get to why you talked about solutions and what some of those things are. But the question before that is, you speak some truth, but as you can see, and those watching can see, you like Shamika, you don't candy coat it. You like, this is this. My mom did this. My dad did this. I did this. Whatever.
Mhm.
So, how has that either been taken by people who comment to you after reading the book, or in general, not counting your book? Why do you think because you talk a bit about conservatives. I didn't get into the politics of it a bit, but you talk about conservatives and how they think differently from others and how they're treated. So why is it that they're treated so differently, not necessarily from a political standpoint, but just saying something that doesn't comport with the norm? Why are people treated? Why can't people just say, well, I disagree with you? Why do they have to tear you down? Why do they have to attack you? Talk about that a bit.
Well, I think it all stems to there is this belief that there is a monolithic way of being black or living in black skin or thinking black or dressing black or acting black, you name it. There is this uniformity, right? And if you question any of it, then you are stepping against the orthodoxy, right? That's why I titled the one chapter, Poisonous Black Culture, and it's because it is poisonous. And so when someone is conservative minded, that is by definition not normal, because the normal is majority of people are, or at least they vote liberally. Whether they are conservative is a different story, but they vote liberally, they vote for Democrats, so on and so forth. So when you step away from there and you go towards the other end, you are not normal. But it's different for us versus
But I don't
other
even mean
ethnicities.
politically, though. I mean, like,
Yeah.
What's wrong with a black man just saying, like, I don't get it as often, but I sometimes get all that stuff. You Republicans. I never said I was a Republican. I just said, you want to do police reform. I'm okay with it. So there's no argument. I
Yeah.
said, you want to make sure the police are doing the right thing. I said, I'm with you. But can we also talk about people shooting people in the face? Can we frown on that? Is that cool? Can we frown on that? Shut up, you hater. Like, whoa, I just don't want you to shoot people in the face. I mean,
Right.
you can't say that. So you can't say, but there is criminality. I write a book about the 1619 Project, about the guy who wrote the essay on mass incarceration. So he's talking about these race and this and how police do this and over sentences. And I'm like, yeah, we can tweak some things, but can we talk about the criminality? You wrote a whole essay. You never mentioned, maybe people should stop sticking guns in people's face. You can't add that too. That's all I'm asking. You can't say that. You can't say what you and Shamika say about, well, you get pregnant a lot or you have sex with anybody, there's going to be repercussions. I'm not even telling you not to do it. I'm saying there are going to be repercussions and
Right.
you have to own it. You don't want to own it. Don't go blaming the baby daddy for sleeping with the married guy. You both did it, right? Don't blame him solely. You can't say that kind of stuff. You can't say that there are jobs out there and you have to be agile. You have to learn skills, right? Like I always say when people say we need jobs, I mean, no, you need skills. You don't even know how to do any jobs. The number
Right.
of jobs you know how to do is 0. But you're saying the community only has 10. We need to bring 400 to the community. But you know how to do 0. So if
Right.
I bring another 500 jobs to the community, guess how many you know how to do? It's still zero. So why can't we say that stuff? I don't want you to be a loser. I don't want you whatever. I want somebody to teach you a skill. I'm even willing to teach you a skill, but you won't learn the skill if you won't be honest enough to hear me say you don't have a skill when you need one. I say that, you're like, oh, you hate black people.
I'm getting that for just the CRT video. I'm getting, oh, she's a sellout. She's selling out her own people. For wanting our children to not be taught that they're oppressed? Are you kidding me?
You literally said, I don't know what they're teaching, but I know if you telling my kid that she is oppressed, I got a problem with it. How dare you have a problem with them telling you your kid is... Oh, yeah, it's crazy. I get that stuff too and say, well, you just don't want to help. You mean by teaching kids the skills that they need and helping them get great of it. So you want to... Sorry, we're Bigfooting you, Adam, but we just get so upset about this. So you want to scrap gifted programs and SAT tests because blacks can't get higher scores. I say blacks are just as good as anyone else, and if they're not getting the grades, why don't I put up the money to give them the SAT? Because your argument is whites can't afford SAT training. How about I put up the money for the black kids to get the SAT training? And instead of saying, good job, I never thought about that, it's like, oh, you sell out.
Right.
You hate black people. Oh, so you just think a black kid can just train and learn how to do it and he'll learn? Yes, I actually do.
Right.
Oh, you play. What is wrong with these people? Why can't you say these things?
So I know I veered into the political part, but I think it's an all-encompassing mindset. It's a monolithic mindset. I think people have grown used to that there is one particular way of doing everything, whether it be raising your children, whether it be politically, anything, dressing, speaking, right? Me and you, the way we speak, well, we're suspect because we're not using, ghetto vernacular.
I be he be we be she be.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and see how crazy that sounds. Like just
now
because
you are dragging me down, I don't do that. I'd like to apologize to the Academy. I didn't. That was Adam and Shamika's role. I stepped out of my role. I sincerely apologize. Carry on.
Yeah. Listen, I'll say it. I'm black and wrong, apparently. And I'm fine with that. But, it's just from that perspective where if I behave a certain way, I am suspect to not being of the ethnicity that I clearly am, right? Which is why nobody has a problem when someone goes on a publication and says that Larry Elder is the black face of white supremacy. And it's an illogical thing to say, but black people understand it and they're perfectly fine with it.
Candace Owens is a white supremacist.
Right.
All black, lots of black people, but all of them aren't politically black. We don't want no black voices that aren't black, that aren't talking to black people or whatever. What is wrong with these people? And why are they all, see, now I'm going off on myself. Why are they all dating white people and they all mixed? Can we get some real black people to call me out for my lack of blackness? If you go call me a fake black person, at least be black.
Exactly. Right.
Well,
you better not be mixed. So I'm coming for you.
Nicole Hannah Jones. No, it was because I was. Yeah, I had to clear my throat. I'm sorry. Go on.
But I actually want to go a little bit deeper because one thing that you'll notice is that there's a lot of emotion when it comes to it, and this goes back to single parent homes. We have more and more people who are raised up around women and not raised up with men as well. And I see it like this. It's a balance, right? You're supposed to have exposure to both masculine and feminine for both men and women. You're supposed to have a balance. And what's happened is Black Americans have had the loss of a masculine and the increase of the feminine, which is why everybody is emotional. They're politically emotional. So they're easily swayed. Now, who is doing the swaying is a different story, but there are people who recognize this and they take advantage of it. And so this is why you're able to convince a majority of a population that they're being oppressed, even though nothing in their personal life would indicate that they're being oppressed, right? So they have the cognitive dissonance to say, I am oppressed. And they look around them, and some of them are the most economically successful people.
They're at the vineyard. Yeah, they're at Martha's Vineyard. Yeah.
And they have no issues whatsoever, but some of them still believe it. Some of them are just making money off of it, but some of them actually truly believe.
Rogers.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Kendi.
Yeah. Some of them truly believe this way of thinking. Even the average person who is a middle class person, and they go about life, they work around white people, they do all types of stuff, but they're still convinced that they're just one moment away from oppression, right? Like the chains are coming back any moment. And I think the only way that you can convince someone of this is if they've taken on emotion as their primary motive, moving about life. And I see it like this. Anybody who grew up, and I've met people who've grown up with their fathers, people who generally grow up with their fathers don't feel like victims. You know, they feel secure. Let's say it's a healthy father, right? They grow up secure. They feel like they can accomplish things. They're task oriented, delayed gratification. They're usually pretty calm, right? These aren't overly emotional people, right? So they're not easily convinced when some strange person comes on a television and says, you're being oppressed. They're also going to be able to use their logic brain instead of their emotional brain as well. So they can look at George Floyd and say, wow, that's terrible on an emotional scale. But their logic scale says, well, let's look at everything else here. You know, that's not everywhere. You know, they can examine it. We've lost that logic scale because we've lost that masculine scale. And we're supposed to have both. Having too much logic makes you unemotional, and that's not good. So it's not an attack on women or attack on femininity or anything like that. This is an attack on not having a balance. And we are increasingly not having a balance. And because of that, we've become so emotional that we're easily manipulated.
Okay. And then the last question I told you I had was about solutions. You know, you can't go through all of them. You had like 9 chapters just on solutions. But if you could summarize that, you got 3 minutes to fix the problem and make everyone victors instead of victims. Go.
I think the most important chapter, I talk about finding commonality with people, right? Even though they appear different, find something that you can that you can find in common with them. I use the story of my great aunt, Anne. My entire family's black household. And I would go to her house during holidays and we might bring guests. Maybe some of our guests weren't white. Matter of fact, one of the women was her neighbor, was white, and she treated her like a sister. And she would come over and help. Someone might bring a white friend. And you know what? She treated them all equally. She did not care. She treated them all with respect and love. And everybody loved that part about her. And that's one of the things I miss about her as well, is because she brought love to the situation. She didn't care who came through her door, right? She never complained. She didn't say, you know, she wasn't a victim. She never pulled that off. Even towards her last days, you know, she wasn't like that. You know, she would be in an oxygen tank and we'd be at the Thanksgiving dinner and she would still find a way to laugh about something, right? Even though it was a struggle for her to laugh. And I think people need to be more like my great aunt Anne, where they don't care if this person's a white person or a Hispanic person, whatever. What do you have in common? And I also use another story within that chapter, a man who is also conservative. He's in his 70s and we met online and we just started talking. He's a veteran. He's white, much older than myself, but we have in common because we didn't grow up with our fathers. He doesn't even know who his father is. And so we were able to bond over that and find some sort of commonality and really support each other, especially throughout the writing process. And he's been one of my big cheerleaders. And he's been extremely supportive and he's been extremely beneficial in my life. And where would I be if I just said, oh, he's an old white guy and I dismissed him? Right. And I think we do a lot of that. We see somebody as the other and we don't try to understand who they are, what they're about, because there's far more that we have in common than we think.
Right. Well, I guess we'll have to leave it there. He is Adam Coleman, founder of Wrong Speak Publishing and author of Black Victim to Black Victor, identifying the ideologies, behavioral patterns, and cultural norms that encourage a victimhood complex. Adam, thank you for joining us. Thank
you. It was a pleasure.
And thank you all for watching and listening, and catch you next week.
as the US of A. Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to save, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving a day.